Hello, my name is Brenton Harrison of New Money, New Problems, and your host for the New Money, New Problems podcast. I hope that you tuned into last week's episode where we talked about the fact that in light of all this tariff talk and the socio-political unrest, that even when it seems like there's a lot of uncertainty, or there is a lot of uncertainty, when it comes to the impact it has on your investments, you look back through history and you find that oftentimes when we think the market is going to tank, in fact, it is the exact opposite. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's about to happen now, but at least you have some historical examples going back to World War II, the Korean War, 9/11, and so on and so forth, to say that if you look at what you thought the market would do, in fact, it returned the opposite. This week, we're going to lean a little further into some of these fears that we are having people express to us and calls that we're receiving. And they're saying, look, I get it. You're saying that hey, my 401k may not go down as much as I thought it would, but I'm still worried about my job. I'm still worried about the cost of eggs. So what are some things that I can do to quote unquote tariff proof my finances? So let's go through them. We're going to start with number one, and that is to prioritize and layer your savings. And I'll walk through what I mean when I talk about first prioritization and then secondly, layering. Prioritization means that I do feel that even though we don't necessarily know that we're going to have a rough period in the market, that there are various reasons why this is a time where having a fully stocked emergency fund would be useful. And some of that has nothing to do with like stock market forces and everything to do with like the labor market. As a matter of fact, if I look at almost any industry with which we work in terms of clientele, I can tell you that there's unrest in the healthcare field, there's unrest in the marketing field, there's unrest in the tech field. So to me, that would be a huge reason why now more than ever you would want to make sure that you follow some of those quote unquote rules of thumb when it comes to how much you have in savings. Some of those rules of thumb would be that if you are a single income household, or a household that heavily depends on things like sales and commission income, that you should have 6 months expenses set aside. Another rule of thumb would be that if you are a dual income household and those careers are considered relatively stable, that you may be able to have 3 months of expenses set aside in an emergency fund. So that speaks to the prioritization of saying, hey, whereas in the past, I may not have been as concerned about how much I have in cash, now is definitely a time where I need to pay more attention and make it a priority. However, having that be a priority can give you the impression that having an emergency fund means that all of those funds have to be in cash or in regular savings. I don't think that's the case. And that speaks to the layering element of this recommendation. I am a big fan of layering your savings and your liquid cash flow so that you have a certain amount available in case of an extreme and immediate emergency. You have another pool of money that's available where, hey, I can get this money, but it may take me 2 or 3 business days. And then another layer available that says, hey, I can afford to take a little more risk because I would only have to tap into these funds if there's something that's an ongoing emergency, like an extended job loss or a major healthcare scare. But it's not necessarily required that this portion of my funds be as liquid. So let me give you an example based on my household, the stability or dependability of my income and my spouse's income, and give you an example of how I would prefer to prioritize and layer our emergency fund. I would always like to have at least 1 month's expenses available in quick cash. So in a checking account or in a money market fund that can be immediately transferred to my checking account. So that would be month one. Month 2 to 3 may be something that I want to have access to in a savings account at the same bank. I want to be able to log into that account and make an instant transfer from savings to checking. Remember, in this scenario, we're talking about being more than a month removed. So this is something where it's like, hey, maybe my wife is between jobs, or I just have a rough couple of months. I don't have to worry about, oh man, I need this money immediately. I can immediately go transfer from that savings account to the checking account. Now, for me, I'm not a person who thinks that you need to have just oodles and noodles of cash set aside, even in those accounts. So I may do 1 month in each pool, right? 1 month checking, 1 month savings. So that's 2 months. And anything from maybe 3 to 4 months, I would put in a high yield savings account. We've talked about these ad nauseum, where instead of your local bank where you're getting, not even 0.5%, maybe you're getting 0.1% in terms of an interest rate, a high yield savings is account that's going to give you right now maybe 3.5 or 4 or 4.25%. So even though the money's in cash, you're getting a higher return on your investment by having that high yield savings account. And anything beyond that period, I'm going to have in a non-qualified brokerage account. Because to me, it's not something where I'm worried about the day-to-day activity of that brokerage account, even if it's in the stock market going up and down, because it is the fifth and sixth or beyond month of our emergency fund. And in the scenario where it's looking like we may use it, I have a lot of time where I can adjust the allocation or the aggression when it comes to how it's invested. So I'm still having or making sure we have that 6 months accessible, but that does not mean in terms of how it's layered that it all has to be in cash that I can access immediately, because it's unlikely that you're going to have a 6 month worth emergency where you need all of those funds immediately. Next up is optimizing your debts. And I have some different perspectives based on the debt that we're talking about. First, because of everything I just mentioned about prioritizing cash flow and having money on hand, I would not say that this is an ideal time to pursue like an aggressive debt repayment strategy. If I had $1 to my name and I had to decide whether to save that dollar or pay down debt, I'm probably going to say during times like these that you should save that dollar instead. But that doesn't mean that you have to leave your debt to its devices and that you can't make some steps to prioritize or optimize how it's being repaid. An example would be with credit card debt. And I'll bring this back to a personal example. The fees that I earn from investment management are paid out to me quarterly. So, since that's a significant portion of my income, I can see increments during those intra-quarter periods where my expenses are the same, but my income is not the same because I'm waiting for that end of the quarter so I can be paid those investment management fees. So, it's not uncommon for me to have credit card debt where it's like, man, my income's lower this month. I have a big credit card bill that I have to pay before interest accrues on that debt. And at the end of the quarter, I may make a big lump sum payment to just zero it out and make sure that I'm not paying any interest. However, during times like this, it's not uncommon for you to get offers from credit card companies that give you the ability to transfer credit card debt from one card to their card and have a period of time, be it 9 months, 12 months, 15 months, where you can have the debt on that card and pay 0% interest. If you're looking on screen, I'm logged into my Credit Karma account, and services like Credit Karma or Experian.com will actually take your credit score. They will look for certain cards like a balance transfer card, and they will give you your potential odds of approval if you were to actually apply for that card. And I've gone to the balance transfer card section and you can see these various offers. For example, a Chase Freedom Unlimited card that gives an offer of 0% introductory interest rate on all balance transfers for the first 15 months. A Discover card that gives a 0% intro for the first 18 months. You can see all of these different options and see your potential approval odds. So in my example, I have an amount of debt that I'm sitting here saying, hey, it is April 24th. It's going to be 3 months before I get my next investment management check. I can either make this payment to make sure I'm not paying interest, or I can say, is it better that I stick this money that I was about to pay in savings to see what the next few months looks like and take the amount that I owe on the credit card and identify a balance transfer card that I can send those funds to. If I have 12 months or 15 months or 18 months, it gives me the opportunity to take a longer period of time and have less of a burden on my cash flow, so that instead of trying to zero it out within the next 30 or 45 days, I can take the next 12 or 18 months to give myself the lay of the land for how things will look economically and then make those adjustments accordingly. Another area where you can optimize your debts are with student loans. We've talked about this a lot on our Escape Student Loan Debt podcast, which is not affiliated with New Money, New Problems. It's a separate business entity. But on that podcast, we've talked about the fact that you are going to see a lot of interest rate fluctuations during times like these. And the way private student loans work, you can see a major change in interest rates on a quarterly basis So if you have a private student loan that's say at 8% interest, if you're checking rates for other loans, on a quarterly basis, you might find that during a 2 or 3 week stretch, you can apply for a student loan refinance at 6% interest, which could make a radical difference in terms of either keeping your payment the same, but still paying off that debt faster because the interest rate is lower, or even lowering your payment if it's the same repayment period at a lower interest rate, or just giving you the option of saying, hey, I have more flexibility in knowing that these opportunities can come up every quarter. And if I keep my eye on it, even if I don't strike now, I need to be aware that I can strike when the iron is hot. That's if you already have a private student loan. But even for people who have federal student loans, this is a very tumultuous time when it comes to federal student loans. It's not something that I would tell you to casually do, because taking a federal student loan and transferring it to a private entity cannot be undone. And there's typically far more flexibility when it comes to how you repay a federal student loan than what you have in the private student loan space. But if you are just fed up with all the stuff that's going on with the federal student loan space in terms of what payment plans are or are not available, what forgiveness credits are or are not being given to your account, then if you find an opportunity where there's a significantly lower interest rate in the private student loan space, then it might be time to consider transferring it over and actually paying the debt off in full at a lower interest rate as compared to trying to have it forgiven under an income-driven repayment plan umbrella. Another area of debt to pay attention to are variable interest rate debts. We will put a link in the show notes to episodes that we've done on adjustable rate mortgages or ARM loans, credit cards are adjustable rates, and especially home equity lines of credit. These are debt vehicles where either on a certain increment basis or even a daily basis when it comes to the tracker that they use to determine interest rates, you can see a change in what you're paying from one payment period to the next. And because of interest rate fluctuations during this time, it may be ideal to see what it would look like to lock in a fixed rate for some of those instruments. An example with the home equity line of credit would be that it is typically a variable rate product, but certain lenders will give you the opportunity of taking a certain amount of money that you owe on that line of credit and paying it back at a fixed rate. Now, that comes with an exchange. Typically, whatever fixed rate you sign up for is going to be slightly higher than whatever the variable rate is right now, right? They're not just trying to make it easy for you. If the variable rate right now is 8, they may say, yeah, you can lock in a fixed rate, but it's going to be at 8.5 or 9%. But if you're worried about what the payment's going to look like if that interest rate moves forward and how it's going to impact your budget, it might be worth you taking some of those portions and saying, I want to lock in a fixed rate and a fixed repayment period, so this is not hanging over my head in the event that it happens. And the last tip before the break is to avoid long-term pleasure purchases. And some people are going to disagree with me on this, but I consider a car a pleasure purchase. Not because you don't need a car, but because most of the time when people get a new car, they're not at the stage where it's like, oh my goodness, if I didn't get this new car, my old car was going to break down as of yesterday, right? It's like, nah, I'm just in the mood for something new. I went to the lot, so on and so forth. Now, if you're in the experience where it's either I buy this new car tomorrow or I'm taking the bus, then that's a little different scenario. But if you are sitting there and saying, hey, I want to do something like buy a car in the next few months, but you know that your car can push you along for another year or two, I would highly advise you to take that extra year or two and wait to see the impact of things like tariffs on the price of these vehicles. So I would avoid anything that is a long-term pleasure purchase or has to be financed and is not required. Again, there's a difference between somebody that needs a new HVAC unit and they just have to get the HVAC unit. But anything that you can do to avoid those big purchases where it's something that could have been pushed down the road until we see the impact of these items, I would encourage you to do so, with the exception of a home. Now, I know this sounds like a huge exception because like what purchase could be more long-term than a home? Probably nothing. But you also have heard me say on this podcast that I don't ever think there is a bad time to buy a home. I think it's always a bad time to buy a home that you can't afford. And that's what gets people in trouble. So to me, as long as you've done your due diligence to make sure that you can afford the home, I would not tell you to just not buy because of something that you're worried about that might occur online. I would say if you buy a home and the rate is too high, then as long as you can afford it, it's not an issue. And then if the rate comes down, if you've positioned yourself to refinance, you'll be able to take advantage of that refinance. There are some rules of thumb that I think are wise to keep in mind when it comes to how you go about getting that home. So, for example, if you're buying a home from someone else, I wouldn't be as concerned. If you are building a home, this may be a tough time to build a home because of the cost of supplies and materials for things like the tariffs that we discussed. So, in 2020, we built our family home. So, the person who built our home, my wife and I went to them and we said, hey, we are interested in buying this home and having like a custom build, but we want a max price. Whatever you're charging now, we're willing to go above that for the guarantee that you cannot go above this price. Meaning, if you're offering us X number of dollars for this property and 3 months into the build, your cost of lumber or your cost of sheet metal or whatever the case is rises, you can't pass that price increase on to us. We paid more on the front end for the guarantee of knowing that this price will not change during the construction process. That type of negotiation will be the type of thing that I would encourage you to do with the help of a realtor or a financial professional, because what you don't want is to be just like a variable interest rate debt in a position where something that you signed up for at one price has suddenly radically changed as a result of a change in the interest rate environment.
This is the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen. We'll be right back.
Are you wondering what new money problems you might be overlooking in your financial life? If so, we've got great news. We've crafted the New Money, New Problems Gap Finder to identify potential weaknesses in your finances in areas ranging from budgeting, investments, insurance, and even the threat your extended family's finances could pose to your household. Please head to newmoneynewproblems.com/gapfinder to complete it today. Again, that's newmoneynewproblems.com/gapfinder to take the assessment.
You're listening to the New Money, New Problems podcast. Subscribe now at newmoneynewproblems.com. Welcome back.
In the first half of the episode, we went through some of the heavier financial topics. Now it's time to just talk about some like lay of the land items in terms of ways that you can tariff-proof your household. And the first way that I would tell you to do that actually has to do, again, with that lay of the land, brushing up on your resume, making sure that you're staying in touch with your professional connections, making sure that your LinkedIn page is active, because I can tell you from being involved in several households' finances, it is a tough economy out there when it comes to the job market. And we've talked on this podcast as well about the importance of maintaining and increasing your human capital. Human capital, for lack of a better phrase, is an assessment of the value that you bring to the marketplace, right? How valuable is it for a company to have Brenton as an employee or Brenton as a resource? That is my human capital. And I encourage everyone to have a good assessment of their human capital and to look for ways to increase it. But unfortunately, I see many people kind of get locked into their day job and put their blinders on, meaning I work for this company. So this conference that is going on that's in my industry where I can meet certain connections and sharpen my skill set, I don't go to it because why do I need to? I'm already working with this company, meaning I don't keep an active LinkedIn profile because I have a job. I've been here for years, but you could be using that LinkedIn profile to highlight things that you're currently doing at your job or make sure that you have active professional connections. So the fourth recommendation is to pay more attention to your human capital, because during times like these, even if the stock market is booming, it does not mean that you're exempt from a reorganization or layoff at your job that could force you to pivot. Number 5 may seem like an odd one when it comes to tariffs, but it's not, and I'll explain why. But this is a time where it's very important that you do a review to make sure that you have accurate levels of life and disability insurance. Life insurance for people who have people in their household who depend on them financially is to make sure that upon your death, a certain amount or all of your income is replaced. Disability insurance is something that's needed regardless of whether you're single or married or have a partner or kids, what have you, because disability insurance is a selfish purchase. It's to make sure that if you are disabled, that a portion of your income is replaced in the event that you can't work. And what you don't want is to be in a situation where you either don't have coverage at all, you go through an illness or an injury and you can't work during a period of time where prices are already increasing, or you don't have an accurate idea of how much income will be replaced. We've talked about this in the past, but your typical disability insurance policy is going to replace 60% of your take-home pay. And it's very common for people to have disability insurance at their job, but be unaware of the fact that that 60% does not include things like bonuses. It does not include things like equity compensation. It doesn't include things like overtime pay, all of which you may be dependent upon when it comes to how you actually get through every month financially. We have people who work at companies like Google or Meta, and they get equity compensation every quarter or every month. And while it's something that's not covered by their disability policy, they depend on that equity compensation every year or every month to cover their expenses. So it's very important that you have an idea of what's covered by that policy. Because even though we would like to have the certainty that during times like this, where the rest of the world is turbulent, at least we know we'd have our good health and good fortune, that's not necessarily the case. People get sick during times like these, and they get sick during good times. You want to make sure that you are protected in the event that either occurs. And then lastly, don't overcorrect and don't overreact. We talked about this last week, so I won't go too deep into here's what to do with your investments in this episode. But if you listen to that episode, we talked about the fact that volatility does not necessarily mean poor performance over a long period of time. As a matter of fact, if you look, at least at the time of this recording, over the course of the past week, you will talk to people who are in investment management, and they'll tell you that, yes, the intraday volatility has been insane. But if you actually look at the returns year to date, this is not like a level of correction that is unusual. So all of these things that we're talking about are things that you can do to position yourself in case the worst happens. But you don't need to over optimize and take your money out of the market and do all of these things with your money that you wouldn't typically do. You just need to be aware and make adjustments as needed. But those adjustments need to be proportional to what we're actually seeing in terms of the level of emergency. And I would say that there's a lot of stuff that's going on right now. When it comes to the impact on your finances, these small tweaks are things that hopefully will have a big return in terms of their value in the event that you need to take advantage of them. Hopefully, next week will be even more stable and we can go on to some other topics, but I will be right back here next week with some more value to help you financially. See you soon. From New Money, New Problems, this was the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen.